Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. This is the place where you get both a coach's and sports dietitian perspective on topics important to endurance sports, including nutrition, training, and how these impact and fit into your daily life both on and off the race course. Your host, Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian with a specialty in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. This is Katie and I'm here with Justin, and I'm actually introing today, so that's a little bit odd. Usually Justin does, but the topic is mostly nutrition related, so I figured I would intro. Before we get started, I just wanted to say welcome for those who are new, and also remind everybody that if you haven't had a chance to go into wherever you listen to your podcasts, if you can go in and like us or subscribe and definitely write a review, we would love that, because we don't take any money from we don't have anybody giving us money for this. So we're just doing it because we like it and we enjoy it, but we would just love to reach more people. So if you can do that, that would be great. We also have, and you'll maybe have to remind me that and make sure I'm saying this right, but we have a Facebook group, the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast Facebook group, or is it just the endurance?
Yeah, it's called the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group.
So if you want to connect with us in more of a community style, that's just a great way. We also have our Facebook page, but that group is more to form of a community around the podcast. So we want to engage people a little bit more on there, but the more the merrier. So please consider joining, and we'll try to add more content as we get more people, and that's a great way for you to ask us questions and interact with us. We also each are coaches, and obviously I do mostly nutrition coaching, but I also coach runners, and I am at Katie at Fuel, the letter 2, and run.com, and then Justin coaches runners and triathletes and all sorts of endurance athletes. So if you want to reach out to him, you can go, is it tabularasaracing.com?
Yes.
Yeah, so just so you know, that's where you can reach us, and then we'll go ahead. I don't know if there's any other things I didn't mention, but we obviously have our Instagram page. Do you want to tell them what you did today? Go ahead. I don't know. People are always interested in what we're doing, I think. So
yeah. Well, today was the long ride and a run day, so I'm training for Ironman Florida 70.3 December. So today was actually a little bump up in volume. So I did 3.5 hours on the bike, and it wound up being kind of like a tempo effort. And so I got in like 67 miles and did a 36-minute run walk interval before the bike. So it wasn't a brick session, but I ended up it's been a rough week stress wise. And so I haven't been sleeping all that well. So on Friday, I really noticed like the quality of my workouts was way down. It was just, I was on the struggle bus. I had a run and a decent swim on Friday, sandwiched in between an 8-hour work day. That was extremely stressful. And so I ended up sleeping in this morning a little bit. So I got a little bit of a later start. So I just got home like an hour before we dialed on for this, just enough time to grab a shower and try and get my brain to function.
Right.
But
I know usually you have a little more time, but I understand.
But it's all good.
Yeah. I actually didn't do much today because I am running a half marathon actually tomorrow. So I'm just carb loading.
Just a little pop-up half marathon, huh?
Yeah, well, I did think I was going to do it. I think one of the episodes prior, I was like, I'm not going to do it. I didn't sign up in time, but somebody's like, just email the race director. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And they were like, sure, you can. We'll have a spot, because I don't know, I guess I've been involved in the community here a while, and maybe just because I asked them nicely, I don't know, they were like, sure, do this link, you can do the race. So it was one of those things where I was actually kind of relieved that I wasn't going to do it, and then they were like, yeah, you could do it. So now I was like, well, because they offered me, they were like, yeah, you can just sign up, but I felt like I had to. at that point, because I'd reached out. I'm like, if
Yeah.
I don't, I'm gonna look silly. So I think maybe things are meant to be sometimes, and we'll see. I also don't have a lot of. I'm not sure what to expect because I've been doing so much speed training, and for this particular race, it's a lot of downhill. It's called the Fall Equinox half marathon here in Fort Collins, so there's a lot of downhill. And it's kind of weird because it's like slanted too. So I think it kind of wears your legs out in a weird way. But my training mentor, my good friend Bob, he's like, "Oh, it's probably good you've been doing a lot of speed work because that'll be good for this race." So hopefully he's right, because I have don't know what to expect. Which is a good thing maybe, because I don't feel extremely nervous or anything. I'm just a little bit bummed about having to wake up at like 4 in the morning to get to the bus. It's like they bus you up, so you have to get there by like 5 or 5:30 to be bussed up. So I have to have an early morning, but it'll be fine. It'll be great. So I'm sure next time we talk, I'll have an update on that. But yeah, so I've been carb loading and drinking lots of fluids and that kind of stuff, which kind of is like what we'll talk. I mean, not we're talking about carb loading today, but we're talking about periodizing or periodization of your nutrition or periodized nutrition. So we decided to talk about this topic because we talked about the training and how to kind of periodize your training, like the last two, or not the last two. Well, we had two, and then we were going to do a coach's corner, but this is coming right after that because I was like, this is a good lead into a similar topic. When you're thinking and planning your training plan, it might be worth also trying to plan your nutrition strategy, not only for like the race, but kind of thinking of it as, to go along with your training plan. And so I don't know if, I feel like there probably are people out there that have heard of this concept, but we kind of wanted to define it. And we wanted to talk about like how you would think about planning or periodizing your nutrition. Like a hard time with that word, I guess. And then some examples, because this just like training, there's like so many different things or ways you could use nutrition in your training or to plan or depending on what you're doing and what you're struggling with. So it's kind of hard to cover every possible option for how you could go about doing this. So we're going to kind of just do like an overview, because a lot of the other things I'll talk about are almost topics within themselves. So we're going to try not to get too much into the weeds on things or off on tangents too much, but really talk about what is nutrition periodization and kind of how we implement it or some ideas. And then I want people to kind of leave thinking of, maybe even thinking about it a little bit more, because there's probably a lot of people that haven't even considered it and thought about how what it might mean for them or how to do it. So do you have any of that? I mean, have you ever, Justin, did you ever come across this topic before, or what is
Uh,
your experience with nutrition, periodizing?
Honestly, I had zero experience with nutrition until I started working with you,
Okay, so
and
now,
that's probably why I haven't had the performance like I would really like to have. So I honestly have not really given a whole lot of thought to my nutrition. I've most of my time would be spent like thinking about my training, and to my own detriment, I would say that I should have given more thought to how to fuel, because a lot of times it's just like I've kind of gone in and I've had like a big session, and I'm hungry, so and then I use that as an excuse to eat something that probably shouldn't. It's just like, oh, I just burned like 3,000 calories on this bike workout. I can now go have a cheeseburger, and it's that mentality that's just like the food is the reward from putting in a good session. And I can honestly say that, being a little vulnerable, that's the approach that I've had over the years of my journey. And so I'm glad that when I reached out to you like well over a year ago now, that you've helped me refocus my thought process and how I think about food and how to use food to support my performance. It may not necessarily give me performance, but it helps support the performance, because you still have to put in the work,
right.
in order to get the performance. But it's definitely I like this whole puzzle analogy when it comes to training. And so, this entire endurance puzzle is composed of many different pieces, and training is just some of the pieces that we try and look for to complete the picture. But nutrition is a significant part of the endurance puzzle that we're trying to put together. And I think a lot of people just don't think about it. I think sometimes like food can be, there's a social aspect to it, or there's a reward mentality that's tied to food. Not necessarily the same kind of processing or emotions are tied to training in such a way. So it's like, well, I can stop training, but I can't stop eating. So I got to figure out like, how to eat to support both life and training,
Right,
and
yeah.
then still we don't want to be so rigid all the time to where it's just like, oh, I'm eating to fuel. No, we eat for social
Right.
reasons. We eat for sometimes boredom reasons. There's all kinds of reasons on why we eat and why we should eat or why we shouldn't eat. And so I think this idea of periodizing the nutrition is something that I've never thought of,
Mhm.
while I've given a lot of thought to periodizing training. And so I'm here to learn from you just as much as all the other listeners aren't in here. So I'm trying to take a seat back and
It's
let
okay.
you and
I'm
let
just
you
curious
roll with
about
it.
your experience,
But
so
uh
I
but
didn't wanna.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited to
No,
to learn a little bit more.
it's good. I think you kind of bring up a few things. I think, even when we're like, obviously the training itself, it's not the nutrition piece and how we're planning nutrition and periodizing that isn't going to be the exact same as how we're planning our training necessarily, because we do have to eat. Like, we may only train once a day, sometimes twice a day or more, but we do have to eat 3 meals, and there are a lot there's a lot more going into the food piece. But this is more just, it's not like nothing rigid about it really. It's just kind of, I mean, hopefully people aren't being too rigid in general with their nutrition. There is a piece of nutrition that really is about enjoyment and, social and all of those things that improve our lives actually, especially that social aspect. This is more just kind of using the nutrition and combining that with your training plan, or even sometimes using the nutrition only, to obtain some sort of adaptation in your exercise performance or in the outcome of the particular training session or a training block. So we'll kind of go into how you would and how you can kind of use periodized nutrition similar to training, like a training plan, and how you would think of it in terms of the different cycles and things like that. But that's one sort of definition. Another way that I've seen it put is kind of the planned, purposeful, and strategic use of specific interventions. So just kind of, there's definitely nutrition interventions you can try that you can kind of use along with your training. So it's always generally kind of around the training, but not always. There might be other things you might do during specific seasons that are just nutrition only for a certain outcome. But it's basically just kind of using nutrition along with your training to enhance, or to enhance an outcome, or to get some sort of benefit or outcome from that. Whether it's like fueling more, fueling better during a session. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly complicated either. So I think sometimes you hear that and you're like, oh gosh, there's some sort of like very strategic thing. It could be just as much as just eating more during a session, to try, or playing around or experimenting with carbs during a session to see how much can you consume, or how do you feel if you do more carb? How is that improving your performance or your ability to ride for longer on your bike? It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's just, it's stuff that maybe people are already doing in a way. You just haven't thought of it in this way.
Mhm.
You haven't sort of put that, oh, it's like periodizing my nutrition. It's kind of just things people are doing. But I think the way periodization is more thinking of it along the training cycle, and maybe you're doing certain things at certain times of your training to manipulate the outcome, so that's kind of how we're thinking of it. So when we start, like, the very first thing you kind of want to have is a training plan, right? Like, so the very beginning, you don't really do any sort of periodization of your nutrition until you have a plan, a race,
Mhm.
essentially. So that's a very first step, is like, get your training plan together, like figure out, or in my case, it's like right now I'm in this sort of situation of being like, okay, I'm training now, and then I'm gonna have like a strength building phase and then like a base building phase, and then I'm gonna get into the bulk of my training. I don't even know what that training plan is gonna look like, but I have an overview, almost like that macro cycle of my training. So I might start to be thinking now even about periodization for that. And I can provide an example of even something I might do in that, like how I might be periodizing at a macro level, but we'll talk about macro, meso, and micro like we did for the of your training. But the first thing you want to do is what are you doing? Like, what different train things are you going to do during your training to help enhance performance? Like, what is your training going to look like? What were some of the things, even, and this is what most people should be doing anyways, what didn't go well last time? Like, what in your training or even your nutrition related to that did you struggle with? So, kind of thinking about that first, like, because you should be building a training plan and kind of thinking of ways that you're going to improve or do something a little bit different to work or, work on your weaknesses or even enhance what you're doing well. But what is that going to look like? And kind of thinking about the nutrition in that too. Like, what did you do the last time you trained for a race that went really well with your nutrition? And what did you do that maybe you struggled with? Or what could you do better? Even what could you do with the nutrition to enhance the training, So kind of thinking about that, and we'll talk a little more about examples, but and then what are you doing also around the race? Like, what happened with your race in general? Did you fuel enough the day before? Did you carb load? Did you taper, in carb load? Did you eat something the morning of? Did you get enough carbs during? Did you hydrate? All those things in your last race, and thinking about how you might be thinking about either practicing those things or doing those things differently the next time you do a race. So it's kind of sitting down just like you would with a training plan. And once you have your training plan, and kind of thinking about the nutrition and how you're going to support the training with the nutrition. So that's kind of where the periodization of it all starts. I suppose you could do periodized nutrition in other ways in life, like for other things. But I think when it comes to training, obviously that's where you would want to start. And then you kind of want to think of it just like a training plan where you have kind of that macro piece, whether it's a whole year, depending on what you're training for, or 6 months, like, or 3 months, or whatever it is, the time frame. You want to kind of think about that within that 6 months. So I can give my example here is like, I'm going to start probably in November, December, a good strength building phase. So my volume and running, I'm still going to be running, but it's going to go down, and I'm going to try to build some strength back, because I did lose quite a bit of strength in this last year that I was doing the marathon training. And then I'm going to go into kind of bringing up my volume slowly, and then kind of get into like where my volume's going to be for the marathon. And that's where the intensity will start to come up. So during that strength training, bulking, because I want to gain a little bit of weight. I'm not going to be bulking up, but I'm going to be trying to get strong. My goals in that time frame might be to have an adequate amount of protein. I'm really focusing on my protein intake around the workout and throughout the day. I might be focusing somewhat on carb, but I'm not going to be having the same amount of carbs that I would have during my training when I have high volume, right? So my carbs may be manipulated a little bit with the goal of increasing muscle, but not really gaining a whole lot of additional fat during that time frame. So I'm going to be paying attention to those aspects, and then maybe really paying attention to like getting enough nutrients, like a really nutrient dense diet, because this is also going to be during the winter time, and I don't want to get sick every 3 weeks, So it's like there's probably going to be a few things I'm focusing on. And then as my training starts, the volume starts to ramp up, I'll probably keep my protein where it needs to be, and then I'll be bringing up carbs a little bit. And so a lot of those things will kind of maintain there, but the carb intake will start to go up. And then when I'm at that higher volume, then I'm really maybe bringing in other strategies like fueling with enough carb after workouts, like timing of the carbs and the protein after the workouts. And I'm really paying attention to more of those types of details around the workouts. So it's just that's just an example. So that would be kind of that macros, that whole basic outline of the 6 months or so until the race. And then the meso will be like more as I'm getting into it, like week to week. Like what are my protein goals going to be? What am I going to do after those strength training sessions, like week to week? And then also, how am I going to transition once my volume starts to go out? What is that going to look like when I'm at 50 miles versus 60 miles a week versus up to maybe 70? Like, how is that changing week to week? And then the micro would be the day to day, like this is this day I'm going to, and we're kind of talking this a little bit off mic, is like on my 20-mile day, like how am I really trying to get match as much of the what I'm burning as possible. And we know it's not always possible to eat, exactly the amount you're burning. But you want to try to figure out like how are you going to get the fuel in on those really long days so that you're not in such a deficit that you're climbing out of it the next day. So it's kind of the micros, like those planning of like how of your fuel, like around the workouts and how, especially for those really long days, like I think really prioritizing those days because that's where you're going to be doing the bulk of the training, and there's going to be a lot of damage potentially, and you want to really make sure you're enhancing. That's the whole point of this, is what are you doing to enhance the outcome of how are you supporting your training so that you're getting the most out of it with nutrition. And that's kind of the whole concept of nutrition periodization. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts or kind of things that come up, questions or anything? You don't have to, but I want to take a
No,
break.
I think that this is an interesting approach. I know that one of the approaches that we've worked on together is there are phases of the training plan where because I came to you. I'm a gastric bypass patient, had surgery probably like 12, 13 years ago now. And I've started to see weight increase, and that it's common. I've experienced it from year to year, but I've always been able to like cut it off, and it would drop back down once my training ramped up, and so I was able to shed the weight that I would need to shed. Now, as I'm getting older, I'm finding it. Now I'm at a place where I'm not able to drop this weight. And so I came to you to try and figure this out because, I'm secure enough to know what it is that I don't know. And nutrition is one of the things that I just don't know. There's too much of an emotional connection with food to approach it from a optimizing mentality. And sometimes that needs another set of eyes, to kind of like remove me from the emotional decisions on what it is that I want to eat, how I want to eat it, when I want to eat it, and how much I'm eating, and kind of turn it over to somebody else, like we would turn over our training plan to a coach. It's the same kind of idea. And so when we started working together, we wanted to get me into a caloric deficit so that I could drop weight. But then, the training was keeping us from going in too much of a caloric deficit. Now, I have a feeling that there were some times where I may have been in too much of a caloric deficit. And I think we saw that a couple weeks ago when I started Ironman Florida training. I was like falling asleep at like random times during the day, and I was nodding off. And so there are times where you have to make a decision on, okay, are we going to fuel for performance, or are we going to fuel for weight loss? Mm-hmm. And I think that this is an important decision because it fits into our macro plan. So right. There are times of the year where we can adjust our feeding strategy, and that's our daily nutrition, to support a goal that we're trying to achieve, but we have to have the training piece that supports that. So if you're always training at such a high level and your volume is always high, then you're going to find it challenging to be able to be in a caloric deficit if your goal is to lose weight. And that may not be your goal, which is completely fine. For me, it was. And so I've struggled with trying to find that right balance of training load and being able to achieve the goal. And one of the great things about you is that you came to me and said, hey, if this is what we're seeing in my training right now, and this was just like last week, and this is what you're telling me, and I think it's important because we communicated. So it's not like you saw something in my training plan. You would have never known this if I hadn't told you, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And I think that that is a crucial part of the coach-athlete relationship, is this communication. And if you had not known that, and you would have just kept giving me the menu that you were giving me, it wouldn't have supported my training load, and I would have not optimized. And I think that the word that I'm trying to really bring to the surface here is optimization. Now, we can eat to fuel our workouts. Is it optimal? I have no idea. But if you want to find ways to optimize, then this is a discussion worth having. But if you're not interested in optimizing, then this is probably more than kind of what you're willing to take on, because it requires planning, it requires discipline, it requires sustainable motivation. And so I think that that's important to bring up right at the forefront, is that this is going to take effort, just like your training takes effort. And the time that you spend to develop a training plan takes effort. And so this stuff just doesn't come easy.
Yeah, and I
And
think
what
it's
we do is not
yeah.
easy.
And I think having someone like this is kind of if you really want to do this sort of periodization strategies and really dig into even some of the things that I might talk about as some ideas for how like that somebody may go about this in terms of maybe training their ability or being able to burn fat more efficiently. There's some strategies out there that people and this is kind of where sometimes nutrition periodization has been known for, because there's a whole kind of way about doing that. Like if you want to do something like that, you really almost need to hire a dietitian, because to try to do that on your own is very difficult without underfueling or kind of almost not doing it correctly. So then the outcome of enhancing or optimizing or um, improving adaptation is going to be lost, because it's
Right.
like you don't necessarily go on a low carb diet and then continue that through the whole training cycle. That might be a mistake. You're going to not perform well. I guarantee it. Same with weight loss. Like if you're trying to eat lower calorie and then your volume increases, in your case, I think that's kind of the mistake. I probably should have upped the calories knowing your volume was going in, but you were communicating that with me. And it was like, oh, yeah, this is way too, like, we need to change this. And it was me going in and actually, like, okay, instead of, I need to actually do some changes within the plan and communicate that back to you. Because, sometimes even as a nutritionist or dietitian, I just kind of assume people always know what I know or can almost
Mm-hmm.
change things on their own, be more fuel. But no, not everybody always gets that. And it's like hearing what your symptoms were, what you were tired all the time, that those are kind of telltale signs that somebody might be under fueling, under fueling. So yeah, I think having someone there to help is really important, unless you really feel like you've got a good handle on nutrition and you've done this kind of stuff before. That's great. Like I'm I'm maybe just here to kind of emphasize or provide more examples of things you could try or ways of doing the nutrition periodization. But I think for most people, there might be some basic things you can do that are easy, the very basic level to kind of implement this. But some of the things that I might like mention as examples are going to be a little bit more on the planning and complicated side of things. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, if you don't have the ability to do it or it's a little more complex because you're thinking of it, and you're really taking in nutrition and thinking of the fueling in a much more like day to day, like out like a whole training cycle, and then looking at it week to week and day to day and really thinking about it probably much more than some people have ever thought about it.
I think the key is that it's the small things that matter.
Right.
And so, I can honestly say over the past several years, I've spent so much time, so many hours trying to come up with a great training plan that I never spent that same amount of time considering how to eat to support that. And so, if you're going to spend the time developing the optimal training plan, but you don't spend the time to determine what the optimal fueling strategy is, then why does it matter how much you train? Because you're still not optimizing performance, even though you feel like you've come up with the optimal plan to approach like physical adaptation for performance, but you're still missing the other piece. You're missing a significant piece of the puzzle. And so, when it comes to endurance sports and training and trying to build adaptation, as I said, it's this really small things that matter. You don't spend that time, then you'll get the same results that you've always got.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention. I mean, obviously you need to put the training in, and I think for somebody that's maybe very new to the sport, they'll even when their nutrition isn't superb or optimized, like because they are doing some training, their body's going to adapt and the body can do amazing things. Sometimes even surprisingly without the input of nutrition. But I think this is like something that as people become like seasoned athletes, like they've done more than a few races, they're starting to become a triathlete or runner, like, which, arguably the moment you start doing it, maybe you are one, but it's just more of like you're now seasoned, you've done a few and you're getting better. And there's going to be a point where the training you can kind of, obviously the input of the training will get you better, but the nutrition in a lot of cases is holding you back more at this point. You almost have to kind of think about the nutrition a lot more as you start doing it more, because that's probably something that's holding you back. So if you're putting in all this work training and then you're not eating enough after, or you're not getting the nutrients that your body needs to recover, then you're going to go into the next workout kind of underfueled. And over time, you could almost see yourself not making improvements at all, or not making the improvements that you would likely be able to see if you were fueling adequately, or you had a good nutrition plan in place that would support that training. I think a lot of people just eat, like, oh, I'm going to eat something after. I'm going to try to eat something after my run. That's great. Like, at least you're eating something after you're getting some fuel. This is more a little more nuanced of like, okay, I'm going to make sure that when I eat something after, and then I'm going to have a certain amount of carbs or roughly a certain amount of protein, I'm going to have it timed this way. I'm going to make sure I eat another meal like a few hours later. So it's like this kind of not just like I'm going to eat something. It's like more specific, like what are you going to eat? And what is that you're eating? How is that going to support your recovery and getting glycogen back into your muscles so that tomorrow you also feel good, right? For your training. And so that's kind of what this is, just a little more. And it's not being obsessive. It doesn't have to be obsessive, because maybe you're doing this around your training as you need to recover, but you're going to go out to eat like later in the day, and you're not, I'm not going to be, I've done my recovery around my training. I'm going to let myself go out and have a hamburger or something because I did do a 20-mile run. But then that's fine. But I'm going to make sure that before and during and after this training, I am really dialed in. And then, I'm going to go out and enjoy a hamburger and french fries or something later, because you've already spent that time and effort with the recovery process. That's like that meal later in the day probably isn't going to do much in terms of like, maybe it has some components that might help with recovery because it has protein, but it also isn't going to do much harm. So it's all about balance. It's not like you're being obsessive all day and like, I'm eating exactly this many carbs and this much protein. It kind of depends on, like, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to kind of use almost like an example of like how somebody might use like a low carb approach in their training to get a certain adaptation. And in that case, there might be a little bit more obviously like planning and thought that goes into that, because you're not, maybe going to go out and get the hamburger and french fries. But anyways, it's just, so it's not, I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. It's more of just like in the day, like around the training, how are you enhancing it, and kind of like your just general program on the macro cycle. So yeah, does that
I think one of the
clarifies
points
it a
that you
little
brought
bit?
up, I think is significant. So I don't want it to be
Okay.
missed. And when you said that there is a diminishing return to our training, so especially with new athletes, you can see these wild, just crazy increases in performance simply because you're going from nothing to something, right? And then as you start to get better, you have these big increases in performance, but it's relative, right? So it's not uncommon for somebody who's never ran a half marathon before. They go out, they run the half marathon, right? They get a particular time. And then the next they really enjoy it. So the next year, or several months later, they run one again. It's not uncommon to see a big drop in like their time, which would be indicative of an increase in performance. However, over time, as you become more and more seasoned, the ability for you to generate those types of gains becomes harder and harder. So think of it in terms of an Olympian trains as much as they do to shave off seconds of their performance. They're not shaving off minutes. They're trying to shave off seconds. So you can think of it in terms of that. As you become more seasoned and you become more ingrained into the process, you go deeper into your journey, being able to generate those types of performances is going to get harder and harder and harder. Now, one of the things that I want to bring up is that if you find yourself persistently getting injured, or, you're not able to generate gains, even though you feel like you're eating well and you're performing your training in a reasonable way, right? Not that I want to generate more performance, so I'm going to train harder and harder and harder, longer. So I'm just redlining it every single workout. You've approached it from a responsible way, but you're not able to generate gains, then it may not be training that is your problem. It
Yeah.
could be how you're fueling for it. So if something that I've struggled with over the years is just persistent injuries. So the question that I'm kind of like starting to ask myself now as we're having this conversation is like, man, maybe training hasn't been my problem. Maybe I haven't been overtraining. I've just been underfueling so that I'm not, or not necessarily underfueling, but eating poor quality calories, because I could still be fueling appropriately, but the quality of the calories that I'm taking in is not going to support the performance that I'm trying to achieve. So
That's true. Yeah.
if you keep doing this long enough and you keep digging these holes and you're eating poorly and the quality of the calories are not optimal, then it's easy to see on how your injury profile could get higher. So you could generate a higher risk profile of overuse injury, and it's not the training that you're doing wrong, it's the eating that you're doing wrong.
Yeah, because you can kind of get away with, athletes, I've seen some diets, especially with younger athletes, because you can kind of get away with, a lot. But yeah, you could probably get away with eating McDonald's hamburgers and French fries and candy and Cheetos and things like that if it supplied you enough calories. But over the course of time, you're missing out on micronutrients. And yeah, the body's, if you're working out a lot, is processing through that energy, but you're missing out on other things that are going to optimize your health too. So over time, I'm thinking, there's few, but iron, sorry. Like iron, if you're not eating enough red meat or something like that, you would maybe have low iron, and then you're, maybe anemic and not running well. Or calcium, vitamin D. So you think of those athletes, usually that's also in the context of under eating, but athletes who are constantly getting stress fractures or bone injuries, that's usually a sign or symptom of either both underfueling and or like inadequate calcium and vitamin D, tendon injuries too. And if you're not supporting, if you're kind of thinking of it too, if you're not fueling adequately and you start to tire out, perhaps then if your form is starting to deteriorate a little bit, there's other ways we could go about, maybe making these examples. But yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Like you can. And I think then a lot of athletes initially do, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like you can get away with not really paying attention to nutrition or even having a poor diet initially, because the body is very adaptable and it can, do quite a bit surprisingly before it kind of gets to a point where it's like, yeah, no, like I can't keep asking me to do this and getting better results. Like there's going to be a point where it just doesn't happen anymore. And that's usually when, if we're not paying attention to nutrition, that can definitely be the big piece there, the missing piece. For somebody like that, who's at that example, it's like maybe they're just trying to train, and because they're so busy, and I kind of we talked a little bit about this example initially, but let's say it's that example, like somebody's starting to train, but they're super busy because now they're adding in a bunch of training and they're not maybe taking the time to meal plan or prep, and they're just relying on a bunch of convenience foods. Maybe for them, the whole periodization piece is just maybe using a little bit of the time in their off season to just practice planning. Okay, when you have a little more time on your hands, let's practice the planning and the prep, meal planning, meal prep, healthy meals. How are you going to do that in a quick and easy way so that you're not stressed out about it, or like doing like some of the things that I've recommended, for you, Justin, like prepping ahead, like having one day that you batch cook a bunch of things and just whatever, whatever work strategy works well, or just really quick, easy meals, relying on a little bit of healthier convenience items and other items to kind of make it a really healthy meal. And then that's the that's the change. And then once you get to your training cycle where you're in the middle of it, you now have all these strategies and tools so that you can eat healthy. Like that could in itself for somebody in the very basic level be nutrition periodization. Like I guess, if we had to think about just some easy, like very basic level things that, somebody could do or use. And then maybe the next phase would be, okay, now this person's thinking about their fueling around their exercise. So they're actually planning,
Yeah.
certain like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I have the carbs before and during and after and kind of roughly how much I need to be consuming so that I'm recovering properly. And then that's kind of the next phase for that person. That would be more of that micro level, right? So yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like, oh, this is some sort of rocket science. It could be just as simple as just making your diet a little bit healthier and maybe not relying so much on convenience items or things that are easy, right? So,
I think one of the
yeah.
things that you just brought up and the illustrations that you just used is really, really important. And so again, I want to expand on this a little bit more. Is that sometimes if you sit back and you think, I've got to optimize, so I got to do this, and this, it's easy to get overwhelmed,
Mhm.
right? Especially if you're trying to sort through the information that is out in the open on the internet, and you're trying to figure out like what is real, what isn't real, what's pertinent to you, what would help you or not. Just like how we approach training, if I'm working with a brand new athlete who has, very limited experience running or doing triathlon or whatever, I'm not going to throw them into the deep end of the pool with, like threshold intervals on their first week, right?
Mhm.
That is a great way to burn out the athlete. They're not going to want to do it. They're going to have a horrible experience, and I'm going to get fired as a
Mhm.
coach. I think that we can look at nutrition the same way. There's nothing wrong with taking, pun intended, bite-sized pieces that will allow us to make progress over the long term. So if that means that, you're like, okay, now I'm going to start giving this some thought, and, it doesn't mean that I have to optimize every single meal. Let's find something that I can do, that I know that I can develop a habit and I can build it into my life and make it part of my life to where it becomes now easy to do. Whatever that may be. If that may be like, you eat out, and right now you eat out like at lunch, for work. You work outside of the home, so you eat out. Maybe it's the point where it's just like, okay, now I'm going to only eat out once, and so I'm going to pack a lunch. The other 4 days, or just say maybe half of the week, I'm going to pack, and then form that habit, and then build on it. There's
Mhm.
no there just like we build on training, we can build on the nutrition side of things as well. And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's this idea of periodization where we're walking up the steps,
Mhm.
and so as we get stronger in training, you can think of it in the same light for nutrition. You want to grow and become a stronger athlete, and this is a good way to approach it, I believe, because then you don't feel so overwhelmed
Yeah, and it
with
can
trying
be
to do
overwhelming,
everything.
right? And you can hear things like
Yes.
certain strategies, like train, and I was gonna mention some of these just because some people might be interested in other thought. But like if I go in a little bit like deeper with it, like with some more examples, and I say something like train high, sleep low, like strategies, or carb cycling, or like there's so many like influencers out there, people that maybe in the running space, who knows? I try not to pay too much attention because it makes me angry sometimes, but that are kind of like promoting these sorts of things like, oh, you're going to be a better runner if you just do like this low carb diet, or you do this or whatever. It's very specific and very I don't know, kind of like one-off thing, or it's hard to do because we all have lives and we don't all have like exactly the same 24 hours, and we all have 24 hours. They're not the same, right? We all have different things
Right.
going on in our lives, and some people have more or less time to train and think about these things. And I think a lot of people come to me and they're like, I'm so overwhelmed by all of this information that I'm seeing online. And a lot of the stuff online is complete BS because because it's somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, or they tried it themselves. Oh, I've done keto and I'm a runner and it's like working great for me. Great. Well, probably won't work for most other people. So I'm glad it's working for you. Don't promote it like that. So it's like okay, we need to take a step back because that isn't helpful for anybody. And I think, but the problem is when we're looking for what, maybe a lot of people coming here have recognized that maybe there's something they could be doing better in their training or something that they could improve in their nutrition to help support their training, and they're recognizing that they want to make that change. They want to do something. And they're going online to find information and try to get some help with that. And then I think what ends up happening is they're then like, "Oh, I should try this or I should try this," and they maybe implement certain things in an effort to try a thing, and it just isn't working or it's backfiring on them because maybe it isn't a good thing for them or they need to just take a step back and do something like just making a few changes to their meals during the week. Like they're almost trying they haven't had the basics down yet. You know what I mean? Like I think a lot of people are like they aren't getting the basics. You haven't had the healthy meal. You're not doing the healthy meals throughout the week. You're skipping meals or you're relying on convenience aid options or whatever. You're not fueling after your workout and then you go hours without eating. Like those basic things that maybe you should be working on first. And then you're following these like recommendations that you're seeing online to try something like a supplement is a very good example. Like supplements are probably the best example here. Like you're not doing basics, something like creatine isn't really going to help you out too much because you're not getting enough protein, in a day or something. Like your muscles aren't, you're not going to, you're maybe just needing to work on maintaining your muscle mass and making sure you're not losing muscle because that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to indicate how strong you are and how powerful your running is just the muscle that you can have in the strength training that you're doing. If you're not doing strength training and you're not getting enough protein, that creatine is doing nothing for you. So that's just an example of like, I think there's a lot of supplement examples that we can take here. You're focusing on something that really is going to only give you maybe a few seconds of benefit. There isn't really any supplements out there that are remarkable in terms of what they're going to do for your performance. For, something that's those basic strategies of just eating around your workout or making sure your meals are balanced and healthy throughout the week so that you're you're providing enough fuel. That's where I kind of see the biggest problem. And so when we're talking about periodization, I really want people to go back and make sure before you implement any, maybe more advanced strategy that I might or examples that I might talk about, you need to be focusing on those very basic things because that's going to be what gives you the most benefit. And then once you feel like, hey, I've got this, I'm good. I'm eating really healthy. I'm planning my meals. My energy intake is meeting what I'm burning during exercise. I'm not under fueling. I'm eating really well after my workouts. I'm really thinking about how many carbs I need during my long runs and kind of optimizing all of these things. And then you can start to think about, oh, is there something else that I might be able to do? Should I maybe consider maybe becoming a little bit more fat adapted so that when I'm doing these long runs, I have my burning a little more fat and I can rely a little less on carbohydrate, or at least maybe not be burning through so much carbohydrate? Would that be able to get me a little bit like further into my ultra race and be able to have a better outcome because of it? And that's always the thing is are these strategies going to help me become better? Like some things are out there and I don't think they really have any merit to them. And oftentimes it's just small, maybe small benefits. So we always have to kind of be thinking about that. But I think it's just really making sure you're doing everything the basic like the basic stuff, right? Does that make sense? I think
Do the simple stuff right.
yeah, do
I
that
mean,
right. Like, yeah, you got
yeah,
that stuff
just do
down.
the simple stuff.
Because that's where I'm at. I mean, I experiment a lot with different I'm not like there's safe supplements. I'm always very cautious about what types of supplements I try. But that's because I've gotten to the point where, I really obviously as a sports nutritionist, I think most people would expect this from me, but where I am really conscious of my diet and I'm thinking of what I'm eating before and during after making sure that my fuel is adequate, I'm not under fueling and, really taking that effort to do that. I think once I'm there, like I'm at this point where yes, it is hard. I'm not PRing like in races. I'm also getting older, but I'm not having those same outcomes that I did, 10, 20 years ago when I was younger and newer to running. And so, but I have all the basics down. So now it's like kind of I'm at this point where I have this a little bit of fun trying to experiment with different things, but that's not where people start, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
I think also it's like one of the things that you kind of briefly mentioned, it was a route that I kind of wanted to take is that before I started to work with you, I would go back in my memory and say, what worked for me before? What are some of the approaches that I used that allowed me to lose weight? And then I implemented those, but they still did not work. And so not we also have talked about periodizing our training. The strategies that we use change over time because we change over
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
We get older. And so then there becomes this shift of focus where it's like now we have to start focusing on strength training because as we get older, we start to lose muscle. The body starts to cannibalize on it. And so it's like you become weaker and weaker and weaker. And then all of a sudden now you're becoming injured. And you're like, I don't understand. Like, nothing's changed. I'm still training, aerobically the same way that I've always trained before, but now I keep getting hurt. I think that one important thing is that we can look at nutrition the same way.
Mhm.
Just because, a strategy that I implemented in my 30s worked well then, now being in my 40s may not work as well.
Mhm.
And so I think that this experimentation and this adaptation over time is an important thing to consider and to discuss. How do we adapt and change our methodology as we age?
Right,
Because I
yeah.
would I would think that some of our listeners may be in the same kind of like age categories,
I mean,
like may have
I
some
was like,
older
this
some
is like
older
a
some older athletes. So
yeah, this is
it's
like a
it's
topic
reasonable.
almost on its own, like the aging athlete, the masters runner, because there are some things you want to consider and things that happen as our body ages. And so just an example there. And I think let's just throw out kind of an example. And I also want to talk and throw out an example of like periodization for weight loss. But I do think that's a very good topic on its own of like what's happening in the body as we age and why might we need more protein, for example, or why might we not tolerate carbohydrate as well as we age? And women are almost a whole poor women. So we have
Yeah,
to
the
go
whole
through menopause and
perimenopause
perimenopause,
thing
and
is
that is
yes,
I work with many women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, and it's hard because there's some changes in the body and with the changes in hormones and things like with men and women, testosterone going
hmm
down and those change maybe the way we build muscle or the way we utilize fuel. And so it becomes a little bit more complicated. So an example might be with yeah, with an athlete who is aging, we're going to, in their training plan, make sure we're implementing more strength training. Hopefully, a good coach would recognize, okay, I mean, anytime in any age, I think strength training is important, but let's say we have an athlete in their 40s, yeah, and they haven't done strength training. That's like a first priority is like, let's try to implement, like, start getting on some strength training program along with your
right,
endurance training. And then maybe there's a talk about how we need a little bit more protein as we age, especially as athletes, but because maybe we're not utilizing it as efficiently as we age and mostly as we get into our 50s and 60s and beyond. But that might be a conversation I'd have is like, okay, for you, it's very important. You can't get away with those days where you only get 50 grams of protein. You need to be eating at least 100 or whatever the goal is every day. That's a big priority. And for some certain women, maybe because of their estrogen levels declining, they might have a little more resistance, insulin resistance, or there might be something going on even in their running. Like I see this a lot with aging athletes. So there might be a conversation around carbohydrate intake and when carbs should be consumed and when they need to be minimized. And it's just going to be more important maybe for that age group because they are seeing a little bit more of that fat around the middle and they're still training a lot. So those are just a couple examples of like for that aging athlete that we might focus on and the periodization for that group or for those two examples, which might be both the same person or, but that would be kind of an example of where we would maybe implement the periodization is with the not only with the training periodization with the strength training piece, but then with the protein piece and then maybe the manipulation of the when I say manipulation, it just mean like how we're strategizing carb intake around workouts a little differently. Might be one of those things like you're having your carbs earlier in the day around the workout, and then we're not going to eat a whole lot of carbs at night when we're a little less sensitive to insulin, and it might be worse for that population at night. You know what I'm saying? So it's like things like that. And it's
Yeah.
okay, like, but we're still going to try to like optimize for your training, but there's just these other factors that we're considering. So that's examples there. And I definitely want to, I think we should revisit some of those things, because I think now people are like, well, I want to know more about that. Tell me more. And then with the weight loss, I think then we have covered weight loss, just not in the podcast. We did like a Zoom call on it. But with weight loss, I think it's like it's trying to implement the weight loss piece outside of the high training volume. So like with you is like we were going to try to, okay, we had this conversation about decreasing volume and then trying to do the weight loss. And then it's not your fault. It's just, this happens. This is what happens in life. And then you had this opportunity to do this half Ironman. And so now it's like, and I think I kind of told you this the other day, I'm like, no, I just think we need to now switch gears. Like it's, it's possible you might see some weight loss, but that's not going to be our goal, because our goal is getting you to the starting line healthy and fueled for your race. So you can actually finish it and hopefully do well and not be like miserable because you were telling me you were so tired and all of that. So it's like, okay, maybe right now during that high volume, you're getting to the finish line. And then if you, just depending on what your goals are for next year, let's say you get into January and maybe you have 2 or 3 months that you can reduce volume and really focus on the weight loss piece. And so for someone with the weight loss goal and they're coming to me like, this has happened sometimes 3 months before their Ironman or before their marathon, like, I want to lose some weight. It's like, like you're just gearing up your training for this race. Like it's just not a good time. But how about we plan your fueling strategy so you have the best race possible, even if you feel like you would be better at a lower weight. You're not going to have a good outcome if you if you're under fueling. Right. So let's focus on this. And then as you think about your next training cycle, how are you going to build in a block of like weight loss, time for weight loss, so that you're not simultaneously trying to train for something and actually have a good outcome and lose weight. So that might be part of the periodization plan. The periodization plan would be like 2 or 3 months, or maybe even longer, depending on how much they have to lose of weight loss, and focusing on that. And then once they get to close to where they want to be, they can start to sort of shift gears a little bit and up their volume, and then their training their nutrition now is changing. Now it's in maintenance mode, and so they're now better like managing their fueling to match their training. So then that's an example of how so you're looking through the whole season, like, okay, we're gonna underfuel a little bit to promote weight loss, then we're gonna match a fueling, and then maybe in the months leading to the race, there's some other sort of goal there with the nutrition to help optimize some aspect of their training or their performance or their race. But those are just some examples. I mean, and there's so many like little examples, and I think I already mentioned this, so I do want to talk about it because I mentioned it earlier, was with the cyclic, just with the low carb example. And I don't recommend this generally for very many people, because for somebody who's doing like a marathon or a half marathon or even like a half Ironman or maybe even an Ironman, because anything that's really less than 10 hours. I just don't think that, I think that you can get away with eating enough carb during those races to have a good performance. Like being more fat adapted isn't necessarily going to improve. I mean, it's always nice to be fat adapted, to be able to burn more fat while you're training. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I just can't say for certain that's going to enhance your outcome or performance on race days. Just keep that in mind. But let's say we have somebody that's like an ultra distance athlete and they really struggle with getting in fuel. Like they can't do 120 grams of carbs, like David Roach or something like this, is like one of those people that's just like, they just can't. They have gut issues or something. This might work for somebody who has gut issues. And there's other things you can do to address gut issues, so you don't have to do this. But for somebody that maybe has gut issues during an ultra race, they might want to be more fat adapted. And so maybe they would do a period of their off season or their base phase season, or kind of before the base phase, where they do kind of a lower carb approach. Doesn't have to be keto, just enough low carb that you're kind of going into your workouts a little bit glycogen depleted, or you're kind of going in, and you could do full on keto, just very hard to get enough calories and to fuel adequately and not have that take away in other aspects. And then what you would want to do is then use, as you're ramping up the volume, gradually increase the carbohydrates. So you've kind of gone through a phase where you're now training your body to be more fat adapted. You're adding back in the carbs now you're also hopefully getting carb adapted. So you're basically enhancing your metabolic flexibility, which is, I think, a whole topic we can discuss at a later time all on its own as well. And then maybe within that time that you're training, you're doing specific workouts. So this is where that train high. So you train in the evening, you've eaten enough carbs during the day. You do a hard workout in the evening where you're depleting glycogen. So it's like a hard, maybe lactate threshold tempo, something that's kind of long and difficult. You're depleting glycogen throughout the workout. You're not taking in carbs during the workout, and you're not taking carbs in after that workout. You're taking in protein and you're taking in fat, but you're basically low carb. And then you sleep overnight, low carb, and you wake up in the morning and you do another workout or another run, basically fasted. I guess you could have something low carb like protein, but you really are just fasted. And then you go into that workout and it's going to feel crappy because you don't have any carbs. But you're basically then just kind of keeping your body sort of used to burning fat, because you're sort of forcing your body to utilize the fat for fuel, but it's not going to feel great. You don't want to do those types of workouts all of the time because it is very depleting. And when we deplete glycogen, it kind of sets us up for some problems with our immune system and maybe getting sick and things like that. But then you maybe would strategically implement that, or some low fasted runs every once in a while, not every day, like once in a while, every couple of weeks, maybe. And then basically what that's doing is it's like you're going to this point initially where you're lower carbs, so you're, sort of forcing your body to burn more fat. You add the carbs back in so that you're now forcing the body to also okay, now I'm getting the carbs. I can become more carb adapted again. And then you're doing these strategic things to kind of keep that fat adaptation and then become very flexible. So basically, if your body is running out of carb or glycogen, it can easily burn more fat, and vice versa. When you get the carbs in, the body can easily burn carbs. So that's a strategy that you could use. That's one of those things that is very much more nuanced and very specific to very certain types of athletes. I've never done anything like that because there's no reason for me to do that. And I just think going low carb is a miserable thing that I don't want to ever have to do. I like carbs. I have tried things though. Like I've done some experiments. I've done I've done a workout in the morning. I don't like the idea of sleeping overnight without carbs. I think I would sleep terribly because I just don't think I would do well. Like I need fuel, I need carbs to be able to sleep. But I've done a workout in the morning like that where I've eaten carbs before. I did a track workout, a really hard one, and then I went low carb the rest of the day and then a double workout. So I did another run in the evening. So it was like a pretty an 8-hour window of no carbs, and then did another workout. And I can't tell you if it did anything, to be honest. I was just experimenting because that's like I said, that's kind of where I'm at with my nutrition, is I like just trying different things to see okay, there's these strategies out here. Do they really work? And I do that with my training too. And I cannot tell you if that worked. It probably didn't do much. Honestly, it just made me really hungry and kind of grumpy. So I don't know. I cannot tell you. I don't think honestly, that's not something I would generally recommend for most of my athletes unless they're really wanting to explore kind of the, fat adaptation piece. And maybe they're doing an ultra where they're just struggling with gut issues, which a lot of some athletes do. So that's just another example. So you can see there's so many, examples of how to implement this. But we kind of went from a basic to some more complicated pieces, but I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions. We're kind of over the hour now, but I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of.
I guess the only follow-up
ideas.
question that I have, and it's just because I'm just curious, and it's simply because Training Peaks now has a feature within it for bike workouts. As long as you have a power meter and you're supplying a power number to it, it will break down your total caloric expenditure by carbohydrate and fat.
Interesting.
If you notice, and you use a Garmin, calories that are going to be saved in Training Peaks is not going to be the same calories that are registered in Garmin Connect. And so the reason is because they want the two to roll up. So they add the carbohydrate and the fat together, and they produce what their total caloric expenditure is, which is different, and it's significantly different. For me, it's like around 500 to 600 calorie difference for some of my longer workouts. So the question that I've got, and you may not answer it in this episode, but we can talk offline if that's the case. But what is a good percentage of fat burning
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
as a percentage of total caloric
Mm,
expenditure?
That's a good
So I looked at
yeah.
today's workout, for instance, for me, and it was an 80-20.
Oh, 80.
80% of my expenditure was carbohydrate,
Oh,
and
okay.
20% of my expenditure was fat. So the only reason I'm bringing this up is because we brought up the topic of fat adaptation. So
Right.
I'm kind of curious if there's other athletes that are out there and you're trying to think about your nutrition approach and you want to try some of these new methods to become more fat adapted, what should they be trying to get
To do.
to?
Yeah, it depends on the intensity a lot. Like, so it's hard because if you've ever heard of like the crossover, it's like the crossover concept. So like so for like a zone 1 easy, it's like you're going to be burning probably like 80% fat or
Mm-hmm.
so, maybe more, maybe less depending on the person, but and then the fat so the fat's up here, like it's like up here, and this is fat. You're burning more fat and like a little bit of carb. And then as the intensity starts to go. So intensity is on the what is that? The y-axis or the
Yes, the horizontal
horizontal
axis. So
axis. So it's like, yeah, so it's going up the carb as the intensity goes up, the carbs go up, 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 and then you hit like a crossover point, and then the fat's going down in the carb. So like the more intense, so if you think about it, you're doing like a zone 5, you're going all out. Like that's like aerobic, like you're not burning any fat. You're or anaerobic, sorry. So you're totally not burning any fat. It's all carbs, it's all glycolytic. So that's like 100% on that way. And then the other way, it's like close to walking, you're really in zone 2. You're should be theoretically burning a lot more fat. So you can go in and do, like some people do like a VO2 max test. And within that, you can ask wherever they're testing if they can do like an RQ, like an RER, respiratory quotient kind of calculation with that, because essentially what they'd be able to do is give you like a crossover, so at certain intensities. And the theory of fat adaptation is like being able to push that crossover over further, so you're burning more fat at slightly higher intensities. But there's no way you can ever burn only fat, like there's always going to be a crossover point, because our body is not capable of being at a zone 4 or 5 and burning mostly fat. It's just fat is too slow of a burning, even
yeah,
like even you take ketones in, but it's a pretty slow burning, to be able to mobilize fat and break it down, it takes too much time. So we kind of need something that's like rapid, like
yeah,
fuel, and that's going to be glucose. And so it's, to teach the body, even in keto, like you can really push that a little bit, but you can't ever be like 100% anaerobic and burning, fat in that instance. It'd be interesting, like I guess like that's a topic we could really dig into, is just kind of the concept of even people taking in exogenous ketones, because ketones are a little different. They're burned a little bit different. They're burned by the brain. So you can almost, but how they're utilized by muscle may be a little bit different, and whether or not you'd be able to, be only in ketosis. I still think that's a limiting factor, because the body just isn't going to be able to get at those higher intensities on just fat alone. So
right.
you kind of have to think about it that way. So basically the whole goal is just trying to, it's not really even that you're not even going to be able to run faster. It's not even, there's no benefit to you of getting faster. So I think that's an important thing to remember.
Right.
It's not like a performance. There's no performance benefit to that in terms of being a faster marathoner, or the only benefit to that is that maybe then you're burning more fat, so you need less carbohydrate, that your percentage of fat. So maybe you maybe you can only take in 60 grams of carb before you've tried and tried with gut training to be able to go above that amount, and you just can't. It's so you start to puke. You got the gut problems, and you just can't do it because for whatever reason, and you've tried all so many things. And so that might be fine for a marathon to get 60 grams of carb. You probably make it, but you could maybe stand to be a little more fat adapted because then you won't maybe hit the wall so much. But it's really going to matter in like a really long race because at some point if you're not able to take in enough carb, you're just going to deplete your glycogen stores. And then you're just going to have to be fat adapted because you're going to slow down, right? So it only benefits people more the longer they go in a race. And so I think it really helps. I mean, honestly, if you're able to take in more carb and you can handle it, like that's probably the easiest way to go about it. And there's no detriment to that. But if you really struggle or you just hate, for whatever reason, hate taking the carbs in or you just can't do it for gut reasons, like that's probably where that is coming more. A good thing or a thing you could implement or try, but I just don't think it's not helping you get faster. It's
But
not like this.
if somebody came to you and said, I am a gastric bypass patient, so my body doesn't really like carbohydrates very well, doesn't tolerate it. I'm kind of limited in terms of like how much I can take in at a particular time interval. And so I want to come up with a periodized plan over the year to increase my fat adaptation to become more metabolically efficient. That is a reasonable
It could be,
way
yeah.
to illustrate the
Mhm.
importance of periodized nutrition
Right.
because you have to develop a training plan that supports that approach. Because if you want to become more fat adapted, that's not the same time that you're going to say, hey, I want to increase my FTP and
Mhm.
on the bike, and so I want to become a faster, stronger cyclist. Well, in order to become more fat adapted, we have to limit ourselves to zone 1 and zone 2 efforts because that's forcing the body to use that fuel source rather than going to the fuel source it wants to go to support the higher intensity, which is going to be the glycogen, which is
Right.
a fast burning. There's really hardly any kind of processing to where it needs to convert it into something. But for fat, it's got to convert the fat into energy. So it
Mhm.
needs time to do that. And so as your intensity remains lower, it provides the body that time that it needs to convert the fat into a fuel source. So talking with somebody like you and then their coach, and they're like, we need to come together and we want to build a periodized training plan and a periodized nutrition plan that supports what I'm trying to achieve.
Mhm.
And like this stuff just doesn't just happen.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
purposeful. There's a strategy involved, and so I think that that's a great way to kind of
Mhm.
illustrate what it is that we're talking about and how we approach nutrition in this conversation. That's a real world example of how we would implement something like this.
Yeah, it's not something you're just gonna be like, "Oh, I wanna be more fat adapted, but I also wanna be faster," right? Those 2 those 2 have to be kinda separate, like, you're gonna have separate times in your training cycle, the periodizing them out so that you're maybe first focusing on the fat adaptation piece in, like, a base training phase when you're not really doing a lot of speed, and then you're kind of what I mean? So that's exactly
Yeah.
because you can't do both very much. I mean, you're gonna run into problems trying to do both of those things at the same time because they're kind of counter the goals there are a little bit counter, but you can do them both in the same training, like, plan it when you're looking out and periodization periodizing your plan or doing that
Yeah.
periodized nutrition plan for the year, right? Because you have maybe those 2 goals, but they're not gonna be able to be done at the same time, not very easily. So let's like, how are we gonna implement that's a great way to end it because it kind of, like, illustrates maybe a little bit, like, of how you might go about thinking about it and what are your goals, what do you want to accomplish, and what are the nutrition strategies you're gonna use, and do those nutrition strategies, like, counter your goal? Like, if you have multiple goals, and then how do you build it in so that you can accomplish a couple goals, and how is that gonna look throughout the season? So, yeah, I think that gives it a I think that was a good ending point because that was maybe the more complex example, but it kinda shows how you could implement this in a very basic way, and then how you could maybe go about implementing it in different examples, but to the more like maybe strategic,
Yeah.
more nuanced, complicated way of implementing nutrition periodization. So yeah, I think I think there's like within that we just covered at least 3 different like I'm like I need to write this down, like the older athlete, master's athlete, the metabolic flexibility, and maybe even diving a bit more in depth into the fat adaptation piece and um, why it's not necessarily carbs versus fat, in my opinion, and why, it's not low carb or high carb. It's maybe more how you think about carbs and all of these things throughout the whole season, because I think there's these
Yeah.
like camps of, oh, you have a like low carb athlete or I'm a high carb athlete. Maybe, what is it to be more fat adapted? And maybe that's a topic within itself. So I feel like even today, I feel a feeling that might happen, but we have more topics so we can cover, because I don't want to, like, we could almost go into a rabbit hole, like I said, of talking about each of these and making this into a 3-hour podcast or more, but we won't do that. We'll save it, and then you'll have something to look forward to for
Nice.
another time.
I
Yeah.
love how our conversations kind of go. It's like we come in with a strategy and an approach, and then it kind of morphs into something else, and we get more ideas for other stuff that we want to do. And so
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's a great
I love
idea.
how the conversation just kind of like creates more conversations, and so it's awesome. So
It is like, and it's nice because then it gives us more topics, and I love talking about all of this. So, but we'll end it there for today. And hopefully it was helpful to kind of think about nutrition periodization, how it fits into your training plan and what it kind of means and how it can be different things and like how depending on your goals. So, and a little bit more in depth there. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Are you good?
yeah,
Any last
I
minute?
think this has been a great conversation to have. One that's definitely been needed. Selfishly for me, it's been needed, and so others will just kind of benefit from it.
Right.
So I'm glad that we had this conversation and we talked about this topic. So we'll do another little shameless plug. So if you're looking for help creating a periodized training plan, you can come and see either one of us. Katie tends to focus on runners. I focus on runners and triathletes, so swim, cycle, swim, bike, run. And if you want to come and build a periodized training plan, and you can tag team it and then go see Katie to develop a periodized nutrition strategy to support the periodized training plan that you then have. You have brought in both coaches.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
there you go. Gonna get both of us that way.
It's great. We can tag team this thing together and help you along in your journey. But we are both we both have spots on our athlete rosters. So if you're interested in working with Katie, she does the nutrition side and she does training for runners. You can go to fuel2run.com and you can check out her profile, check out her website, see her services and everything else, and reach out to her directly. If you're interested in multisport, so any kind of triathlon or aqua bikes or whatever you may have, or if you're just interested in running, I'm also a certified run coach. You can go to tabularacing.com and you can reach out to me. You can reach out to both of us through our podcast email. So it's theenduranceathletejourney.com. And again, thank you guys for listening. Do we know what episode this was? Like numerically? We've talked about like just adjusting the episode count to where it really is by,
I think it's like 19, but don't quote me.
Yeah, I think that we've still done like,
19
I
or
think it's like 20 some episodes
Yeah,
already, but
we
we
have
can
done
eventually just
something
need to
over
just
20.
reset the number and just put it where it's supposed to be
Yeah, maybe
in
go
the
change
sequence.
it.
So maybe we'll figure that out. So we're not going to say like what number this is because we don't know where we're going to put when we actually launch this episode. So this is episode X. So we haven't decided what it's going to be yet, but it will be released. So
yeah.
Thank you guys so much for joining us in this episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie, and we will talk to you guys again soon. See you later, Katie. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to leave us up to a 5-star review on iTunes and Spotify, because leaving a review really helps others like you find us. Visit the podcast website for other episodes of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast at enduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Send Coach Justin and Katie an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.